This is Bernita Reed. I'm here in San Antonio, and I'm with Michael Horace Casey. It is April the 6th, 2018, and I would like to start with him introducing himself.
That I am Michael H. Casey. Live here in San Antonio. My family is from San Antonio. And my grandmother, Grace Jane McCullough Maloney, used to take me and my brother. We would go out to the family residence, and on the banks of the Medina River on Old Pearsall Road, there was a grave, and I have a picture of the, that's a picture of great-grandpa Sam's tombstone. And if you'll notice on there, there's a circle with a star that says TWV. That's for Texas War Veteran. And she told the story that he was injured at a skirmish at the mission in Goliad, Texas, on October the 9th of 1835. That was before war was actually declared in 1836, but the first skirmish during which a settler, a Texas settler, was injured by the Mexican army. And so he is recognized as the first casualty in the Texas Revolution against Mexico.
And how far back do you go with your ancestry? Is it to him?
Well, his father, Sam McCullоugh Jr. was the relative that was wounded, and his father came to Texas in 1835 from Alabama. And I have a little history that at one time in our local paper, we had a series called Texas Lore. And this is a little story that this is back around 1991. And what I'm showing you there is a Christmas card that I made because although grandmother had told the story about my great-great-grandfather, she had neglected to tell us that he was black. And I didn't learn that until I took my grandmother and mother to the Institute of Texan Cultures. And that she was very proud of her Scottish heritage and her Irish heritage. And so I took her through all of those, but as we were leaving, we were going through the black section of Texas history. And there was a wonderful video of Barbara Jordan with that beautiful voice of hers saying, "And among the blacks in Texas we are proudest of is Sam McCullough, the first man injured in the war for Texas independence." Well, Grandma fainted. It was like, or not really, but I mean, I said, "Grandma, is there something you forgot to tell me about great-great-grandpa Sam?" Well, at the time at the Institute, they had misspelled his name as O-U-G-H, McCullough. And that allows for what Nixon called plausible deniability. And so it was like, I was so disappointed because from that time on, I didn't believe my grandmother's relative was the first man injured. I was very disappointed. But, you know, she died, and then...
Go ahead and pause if you need to.
No. Let me turn this off. After she died, I had this friend of mine that just loved the sniff of maybe some scandal. And without telling me, he went off to the archives of the Texas Library and brought back 27 pages of Xerox material that left the black Sam McCullough in Grandma's cemetery, that they had misspelled his name at the Institute of Texan Cultures. And he indeed was my great-great-grandfather. And here's a picture of great-great-grandpa Sam.
Oh my goodness, how special is this?
And that was a picture that my grandmother had.
So,
And she lived, or he lived with the family, because she was born in 1880-something, and he didn't die until 1893. So she knew him.
what did she say about his personality or stories that he told?
And unfortunately, I didn't press her on that. I wish I had learned more.
I know how that is.
Mm-hmm.
That's so typical. Do you know about his being he was free? This was a free Negro?
Yes. Well, the story says that Sam McCullough Sr. came from Alabama, and I don't know if it says in there, but in something I found from the archives, with two colored ladies, Peggy and Rose. And then there were three children. There was Sam and I think two sisters.
Three sisters.
Or three sisters. So I think one of those ladies was Sam's mother. But he raised him and recognized him as his son, and the girls as his daughters.
Are you thinking that the father was white in this case? A free
Yes.
Negro left Alabama
Yes.
with his father?
Mm-hmm.
But you don't know his father's name?
Yeah, well, Sam McCullough, no, as far as the father of
Sam McCullough.
Sam McCullough Jr. that was injured, I'd have to look around, and I could probably find some more information on his genealogy, but I don't recall that.
Was Sam McCullough that was injured? He was a junior. He was the
Yes,
son.
the son of
this-
Sam.
Of Sam that's listed on that.
That was white, and he was born of a white father and a black mother. Yeah.
Okay, this is the Sam McCullough that was born in 1810.
Yes, that's the junior. Mm-hmm.
That's the junior, and that's the one that
Was injured at the battle in Goliad.
And we're thinking that Sam McCullough Sr. was white?
Yes.
Okay. That helps straighten that out. Do you know what happened? Is there a story about how he was injured in the battle, what he was doing?
There is a story, that there was a small company, and I don't know the circumstances of the battle, but he was wounded in, I think, his left shoulder with a rifle shot.
And he obviously recovered.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know about the settlement of the family in Goliad, how they settled there?
I don't think they really settled in Goliad. They wound up, they started out somewhere east, but obviously he was around there to be part of this company. But I don't know much about where he lived in Texas before they came to where grandmother's family was raised, and that's where we would go visit when I was a child.
And where was that, and what was your grandmother's name?
My grandmother was Grace Jane McCullough Maloney, and her father was Lewis Clark McCullough, and they had a farm out on the banks of the Medina River at Von Ormy. And as a result of Sam Jr.'s participation in the war and the recognition of his injury and being the first Texas casualty, the family, received a large tract of land along the Medina River, and that's where the family farm was.
And did your family own slaves? Do you know if there were any slaves on this land?
I do not think so.
What type of crops did your family grow?
I think it was cotton. Mm-hmm.
And I'm still trying to understand the African American side of it. Were you all, your family was not recognized as African American?
No, they passed for white.
Do you think that Sam McCullough, this gentleman, did they know that he was African American?
I think they did.
They must have.
Oh, yeah.
But at some point.
But they married white
Okay.
every generation after that. But I would be curious, see, I don't know anything about his sisters. And I would love to, if somehow we could go back and find out, where they are.
This is fascinating. Do you know anything about Van Ormy? Sam owned a farm near Von Ormy.
Yeah, and that's was passed on to his children, and that's where my grandmother's residence was, and there's a family cemetery out there now that's called the Sam McCullough Cemetery.
So tell me about your grandmother. Who was she married to? Yeah.
And my grandfather was Michael Oscar Maloney, and he was a railroad man, and her family was all in San Antonio. They'd moved into town, and I think there were 8 children in the family. But most of them were in San Antonio. But my grandfather's railroad job took him to Shreveport, Louisiana, after my mother and my aunt were born. And my mother married in Shreveport. I was born there. But when I was 1 year old, my grandfather died, and the family moved back to San Antonio. So I was actually born in Shreveport, but spent just 1 year there, and then the family came back here.
What was the railroad job that he had?
I'm not sure.
And tell me about yourself. When were you born? And you were born in Shreveport.
Mm-hmm. On June the 12th of 1941. And after the first year there, spent the rest of my life growing up here, going off to school to the University of Texas at Austin. I went to law school there as well. And then I got out of law school in 1966, which was the wrong time because my student deferment ended and I got to spend 2 years in the U.S. Army. Got 1 year in Vietnam, of course. That was to be expected at that time. And then came back here in 1968.
And was it a difficult time in Vietnam? Was your experience there?
No, I was fortunate in that, when I received the notice I was going to be drafted, I accepted that. And there were recruiters that said, with my degree in law, I could receive a commission as a captain and be a lawyer in the Army. And I said, well, what's the catch? And I said, well, you've got to sign up for 5 years. And I said, well, I'd rather be shot at. But I was confident that I would be given a job that would use my education, and wound up being a legal clerk in an office, starting out in Saigon, and then moved to a secure base, so I was not really in danger.
At that point, did you know the story of Sam Percola?
No. I just knew what the stories my grandmother told me, but it wasn't up until 91 when my friend had gone to the archives and gave me that information. And so you can see the card is it was. I have a friend of mine that is a printmaker, Eric Avery, quite a known printmaker, and we were visiting around November, and he says, well, all of it, we're going to make a Christmas card. And I said, well, I'm not an artist. But he was very political in his artwork, and he had done a Christmas card the year before about the first Gulf War. And he had done an image of a mosque. And so I said, well, could I copy your image? And so my Christmas card was Malcolm Xmas, 1991. And in the back, I printed that, inside, the history from the paper that told the story. And then I signed it, said, there's something Grandma didn't tell me about my great-grandfather. I said, celebrating my first Black Christmas. That was the first time I knew. Yeah. Oops.
Can this store be closed selling? This store up here, that might I'm going to pause for a second.
Sure.
And see if we can.
I read all this,
Okay.
all of the papers, and then I called Mother. I said, Mother, remember when I took you and Grandma to the Institute of Texan Cultures and Barbara Jordan said great-great-grandpa Sam was black? I said, I found out it's true. She says, don't tell anybody. So
Had you had much experience with racism or with any type of interaction earlier?
I did, because I had grandparents, on the paternal side in Shreveport. So I spent summers visiting my grandmother and grandfather in Shreveport, and they had a lady that worked for her named Pinky that told me I used to sleep on her pillow when I was 1 year old. And she was like a grandmother to me. And so visiting them, they gave me a graduate degree in racism by visiting my grandparents. It was shocking to me. I mean, I ignored it all. It made no sense to me. So it's never been part of my life. But I was very aware of the treatment of blacks in Shreveport. Yeah.
Did you want a Kleenex?
No, I'm
You
fine.
okay?
Yeah.
Has that ever been a part of your legal career, your law as a lawyer?
I really was more of a transactional wills and real estate documents. But, I regret not doing more. I mean, I participated in any of the demonstrations and did whatever I could to make some changes. Yeah.
Tell me about those that you participated.
Well, just when I was at the University of Texas, from 1959 to 66, there was, a time of demonstrations, and would participate in those just to stand up for making some changes. And it was something I regret now not having done more, but was always on the side of trying to, correct those things.
Well, that's remarkable that you did that in those years.
Well,
that was before you knew that you had
yeah,
African-American ancestry.
yeah, that's right. But I mean, being close to, my grandmother's helper, my brother and I, the same, both of them. We just loved her.
This is Pinky.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about Pinky. What was she like? What did she do?
She, worked at my grandmother's house, and there was a little house out in the back. And I'd ask my grandmother, I said, well, why can't Pinky eat with us at the table? And she would try to explain why. And we'd be driving around, and I'd see somebody say, Granny, that colored lady looks just like Pinky. And she says, colored woman. There are no colored ladies. I said, oh.
Those were the times. And describe Pinky. What did she look like?
Oh, she was a little round, but very, very happy disposition. And we would go fishing, and she was always smiling, always happy. And she called my brother and me her boys. Yeah, she was, yeah.
Did she actually fished with you?
Oh, yes. I remember one time my brother and I and my grandmother and Pinky went out to a fishing camp on Cross Lake in Shreveport in a flat-bottom wooden boat. And I was the oldest of the two of us, and so I wanted to get the life jacket cushions for the boat. So I told the guy there, I said, we need some life cushions. And so the asshole brought 3 cushions. I said, excuse me, there are 4 of us. He said, oh, you want one for her too? It hurts.
And what were the years that you were there in Shreveport?
Well, probably when I was, when we were old enough to, maybe when I was 8 years old, through my teenage years, yeah.
What else did you witness in that community that is touching you right now?
Well, I would be visiting the lady across the street in the afternoon and sitting down talking to her. And she got up, went to the front door and latched the screen. We talked a little while longer, then I noticed the mailman came, and he was black. And walked off, and it was like, oh. So it was, yeah, it was pervasive at that time.
Did you grow up hearing the stories from your grandmother about Sam McCullough? And
She
not
did,
knowing-
yeah, as I said, unfortunately, I didn't elicit the stories, just a story about his injury. And she had to be, okay, let's see, he died in
93.
93. So, and maybe she was 1880 something, so she was small. So,
But I was wondering, did your family know that story of a relative having been in the Texas, the first injury in the Texas? So you knew that, you just
didn't know he was black.
Right.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, was this recounting very much a part of your family lore and something that you were proud of?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Was there a celebration of any type around his?
No. Mm-mm.
Is there a celebration now about this legacy?
Not really, and you know, and I've not been to Goliad. You know, they've got the mission there, and of course the massacre later on, after the war began, and the soldiers that were captives that were murdered there, massacred. That's what Goliad is known for. But there's not a commemoration of this battle. So it would be nice to have that remembered, like on October the 9th, say, let's do something.
Where is he buried? Where is that?
This is on the banks of the Medina River here in South Bexar County. There's an old Pearsall Road, and it crosses the Medina River, and there's a big sign for the cemetery that you can see from the highway.
What is that cemetery called?
Sam McCullough. Yeah. And when Sam's father, Sr., donated that land to the Medina Baptist Church for a cemetery, and that's how that began.
So was your family a member of the Medina Baptist Church then?
Back then, yeah.
Or is your family still Baptist?
No.
No. And I'm just wondering, who else was buried in that cemetery? Do you know of other family members besides Sam McCullough?
Yeah, there are some, but then there's a group of, I guess, members of that church from that time.
Tell me also about growing up, your schooling, and whether you attended all segregated schools or...
No. Mm-mm.
Tell me about that.
No, I mean, you know, I grew up, you know, in sort of north central San Antonio, you know, maybe about 5 miles from downtown, in a neighborhood called Los Angeles Heights. And our Mexican-American community settled mostly on the west side of San Antonio, but upwardly mobile Mexican Americans some left the west side and moved to the north side, which was preferable at that time. It's expanded much further north now. So our neighborhood became popular with upwardly mobile Mexican Americans. So in our school, there were a number of Mexican American students, and only just very few black students were in that neighborhood. But it was not segregated, except economically, you know, and this, who was in the neighborhood.
Did you witness any racial incidents in school that
No.
at that time? What did you witness in the community? What was your community like for whites versus African Americans, or anything that you noticed about your you told me about Shreveport, but I'm trying to get back to San Antonio.
To San Antonio. And in San Antonio, there were not that many black students or friends that we got to know. There were a number of Mexican American friends, and that I grew up with, and I felt no discrimination, but I was aware that some people did. Yes.
What do you think allowed you to see this racism, to react the way you did, and throughout schooling and like to Pinky?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just knowing, and loving somebody. And even though your grandparents are supposed to be able to teach you things and you're supposed to respect them, it was easy, as a child to say, this makes no sense to me. And my brother as well. It was part of us, I guess.
It seems like something inherent in you
Yeah.
that allowed that.
Yeah, I've sort of gotten away from the Baptist Protestant church, and I've been on a Buddhist path the last 10 years or so.
What is that? What made that transition for you?
I guess seeing so much of the hypocrisy of some of the churches, and yeah.
What does Buddhism teach in this regard? How do you feel different attending that faith?
Well, Buddha said, did not want to be worshipped. No. But the same code as Christians in the Jewish faith, the Muslim, always have this ideal of how to treat each other. In Buddhism is, follows that same code, but there's no supreme being that you've got to worship or look up to. And Buddha was asked well, what about a supreme being? And he said, well, if that leads you to compassion and enlightenment, embrace it. But if you don't need it, that's okay too. And so there's no supreme being that we worship. But certainly have that same moral code that most of the religions have, yeah.
wondering also how your grandmother found out late in life about Sam McCullough, and I'm just wondering. I wanted to get more of that detail about that day.
I don't think she found out. I think she knew. It was something. And I could imagine the racism back when she was small. And I don't condemn them for saying, passing for white, not dealing with that. I mean, it would have been nice if they had been activists, but so I mean, I would hope that she was compassionate and non-discriminating. She certainly, took care of me and my brother and my cousin. And her siblings that needed things. She was a very kind and compassionate lady, and a great mother, and took care of my mother and my aunt as well as us. Yeah.
Where was this photograph growing up?
This was just in a box of Grandma's photos. It wasn't out in display, but just going through photos and talking to grandmother, it was like, okay, this is her grandfather. Yeah.
Did she talk about her father? Did you hear
No.
any stories about him?
Mm-mm.
And in this photo, Sam McCullough has a good amount of he has his rifle and his pistol
Mm-hmm.
and ammunition belt.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any of that
No.
still?
There is a chair. Now let me look at this. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't. There was an old chair that my grandmother had that she said that belonged to Sam, that I've got out in the car. It needs restoring. It's just,
No,
but
I would love to see that.
I can show you. I'll bring it in. I can bring it in.
I'm trying to think of what his life must have been like, and what.
I think I had a folder that I was looking for, but my grandmother talked about Bigfoot Wallace, another old Texas hero, that there were other skirmishes and battles, probably against Native American Indians, because back in those days that was still a concern.
Was this person, who was Bigfoot Wallace, was he
Just
Native?
probably a contemporary of Sam. Yeah.
Could he have also been Native American with that
No.
name? Okay.
I don't think so.
But not a relative,
Mm.
just contemporary. Okay. And the land that your family farmed, and do you still have it?
No. Not a parcel. It's all gone. Yeah.
Can you pinpoint where that land is?
Mhm.
How would you describe where it is?
Well, the cemetery is on part of that original grant. And this is in Von Ormy. And then the house that we went to is now been torn down and is where the school is located.
What's the name of the school?
And I don't remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But out in
Van
VON, or Ormy, is out there. You're right, and You know, grandmother used to play, you know, like in the river, and this is when she was little, growing up, yeah.
Describe the house. You said the house when you was there, but it's been torn down.
Yeah,
Describe that.
And it was just a modest wooden house.
Like a log cabin?
No. And, you know, at the time, you know, it may have been a replacement for, you know, I'm talking about going out in the 50s. And so I don't know if that was the house that grandmother actually was born in or grew up in. But this was a house that she had lived in out there.
How many rooms did it have?
And we never went inside, but I mean, it was, you know, maybe 2 or 3 bedrooms and just with a porch. Yeah.
Was it one of those wraparound porches, just
No,
front porch?
just a front porch. Just 1 story, yeah.
It was a 1-story house. Was there a center hallway that went through a wide center? You
No,
never been in.
no, I don't. But I don't think so. It was not. You know, the porch was to one side. Yeah, so I think so.
And you said you grew cotton. That there was cotton.
Yeah, I believe that was the crop. Yeah.
Did your family? They were mainly farmers at that.
At that time, I think.
What did your father do for a living?
You know, people ask me about my father. I said, well, you know, I didn't have a father. I had a sperm donor. Effectively, you know that. He went off to World War II when I was like 3 or so, and my brother was 2, and when he came back, he didn't hang around. So I stayed close to his parents, my grandmother, but you know, I didn't spend much time wondering what he was doing. He had no part in our lives.
Were your parents married, or no?
Yeah.
Okay.
Married when mother was 16, and I was born when she was 18. But they were married in Shreveport, yeah.
And what were their names?
My mother's name was Sybil Grace Maloney Casey, and the sperm donor was John Thomas Casey. Yeah.
And your grandmother and her husband, now that would have been...
On the paternal side, she had been married twice. Her first husband was Casey, but her second husband was Horace Booker. That was who I knew as my grandfather. She had remarried by the time that I was born.
And the paternal side was, of course, Grace?
No, maternal is Grace
Okay.
McCullough
Okay.
Maloney,
Maloney.
and paternal side was John Thomas
Okay,
Casey.
thank you. I'll get it straight,
Yes,
maybe. Who was Grace's husband? What was his name?
Grace's husband was Michael Oscar Maloney.
Okay, I'll get it. Maybe. Okay.
And if I find any more of the documents, as I say, I've got a file on it.
I do want to see the chair. Is that something that
Yeah,
you
it's
can
just outside.
bring in,
Yeah.
or should I go out?
No,
to
it's
get-
if you want to maybe take a picture of it,
I would
I'll
love
go
to.
get it. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me, I left this recording. Oh, well. That is something.
Yeah, I will. You know, it probably had little wood slats in the back.
Okay.
So I'd like to have it restored.
Now tell me about this chair.
This is something that Grandma had. It was like out in the garage. But just look at the worn spots here. Like
And the turnings, look at the...
yeah, like he would put his foot right there.
Uh-huh.
But it was something that grandmother remembered as belonging to her grandfather.
Sam McCulloch. And the seat was just...
Leather. Yeah. So it's the leather seat and then the little wood slats in the back.
And you say you want to get it restored or just leave it?
Well, in a way,
It's historic the way it is.
well, you're right.
Yeah. All the original wood and...
So, I mean, I've got it at, at my dining room at the house. Just,
So special. And all of it looks like it was hand done.
yeah.
All hand done. Oh my goodness.
And then I've got Sam's picture up on with all the family members in the dining room at the, sort of like a little altar.
And he would be your great
Great.
grandfather.
I think, yeah, great, two greats, yeah.
Two greats.
My grandmother's grandfather.
Yeah. Is there something about this story that I haven't asked?
No,
that you would like to
not-
tell?
No, not that I can remember.
Okay. Is there anything you wanted to say before we wrap up?
No, it's just, I'm very proud to be his great-great-grandson. Yeah.
And thank you for...
Oh, you bet.
Thank you for this. I want to... Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah.
And to have that bite in you for the African American
Oh, yeah.
civil rights
Yeah.
is something special.
Oh, it's so necessary, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I hope that you'll stay involved with
Yeah,
SAAACAM.
Well, and I was a part of the Carver. Are you familiar with the Carver here in San
Well,
Antonio?
let me get this. That's important. Okay, we're good. Tell me about your other involvement.
Okay, so,
in
no,
San Antonio.
The Carver Cultural Center,
You can wipe back. I think that you blew up. Yeah, there you go.
oops, sorry.
That's fine.
It's a really important East Side cultural center, and Joe Long, the longtime director, was a close friend. And she had a development board back maybe 25, 30 years ago, that I was part of that, yeah.
And what brought you into that? What made you want to be a part of that center?
Well, I mean, I just all of the wonderful programs that she presented, and she was a friend, and she said, I mean, and so many good things had happened through that involvement. At one time she was saying, we're going to be doing a play, and there's a young playwright, I think at the time he was in Houston, that was going to come and put on a play that he had written at the Carver, and he needed a place to stay, and I've got an old house with extra bedrooms, and so I said, well, sure. And so as the time came close, I said, well, when is he coming? She said, well, he's coming next week. I said, well, how long will he be here? She said, a month. I said, oh, a month, okay. And he was just really a hard worker. He was a great guy. We became friends. And I said, well, if ever you come back, you've always got a place to stay. So sure enough, a couple of years later, he came back. And one of the play he wrote was the Colored Museum. And it wound up being George C. Wolfe, who later went on to be the director of Angels in America on Broadway and became head of the Public Theater in New York.
That's special.
And I got to know him through my involvement with Joe Long and the Carver, yeah. And there were other receptions and things over the years that we had a great time celebrating all the things that Carver was doing. And it still thrives, yeah.
And something else I wanted to ask that I didn't think of before.
And this was also before I realized my black history. It was, you know, but it was just such an important part of San Antonio, and great. She had great jazz programs, dance programs, a lot of culture there.
What do you hope to see happen with the Sam McCullough story?
Well, as I said, what I want to do is go to Goliad and see if there can't be some recognition on October the 9th each year of that skirmish. And seeing who else I could get involved in doing that. Interestingly, one of my best friends, with whom I have lunch every Thursday, we've done this for 40 years, he had a relative was in the same company that Sam was on October the 9th of 1835. So I'm going to get him to go with me. And so that would be a good goal you're stirring me up to. I've been talking about it. It's time to do something about it. Yeah.
And
okay, there's another
thing. Videotaped.
Yeah, and there's another thing that I forgot that is part of, there's another art institution that I've been a big part of, and that's Blue Star here in San Antonio. And when that story came out in the paper, there was a very well recognized black artist called Doc Spelman here in San Antonio. Now, he may have died, but he was really proud that he did a painting of Sam McCullough being injured in the war, in the battle at Goliad on October the 9th of 1835. So when he showed me that picture that he was so proud of, I said, Doc, Sam was my great-great-grandfather. He fell over. He couldn't. So he gave me the painting. So I've got that at home too. Just created as, his depiction of what the battle would have looked like. And so you've got this blonde kid soldier in front of him, and you get Sam being shot, and just a depiction of a battle. So that's something I also have in my dining room.
Okay, well, I think that covers
That's all. If I think
it.
of something, give me your card and I'll call you.
Okay, that'd be wonderful. And for the SAAACAM too, they will be collecting memorabilia, scanning things if it's okay.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
And that painting, if
I
that
should-
can be scanned
Yeah.
or something,
Yeah.
so that they can have that would be
And I
wonderful.
should probably leave that to them when I die.
Oh, that
Yeah.
would be wonderful. Thank you again.
Yeah.
Okay.